Hello guys. Tonight's story isn't about empires or great monuments. It isn't about kings or golden crowns. It's about something quieter, heavier, something that lingers in the wind and the soil, in the frost that clung to every morning thousands of years ago. Imagine yourself stepping back into the Ice Age. The air is sharp and unyielding, colder than anything most of us have ever felt. The world is covered in endless snowfields, stretching far beyond the horizon. Survival is not about comfort here. It is about enduring. One more day, one more night. The people who lived in this frozen world carried with them fires, tools, and stories. They hunted beasts the size of houses, and they gathered in shelters made from mammoth bones and hides. They did not know cities or writing or coins, yet they knew hardship more intimately than most of us can imagine. And still, they dreamed, they remembered, they created. So before we wander into their world, take a moment. If this story speaks to you, give it a like and subscribe if you'd like to return to journeys like this one. Tell me in the comments where you are listening from and what hour it is for you, dusk, midnight, or dawn. Now, adjust your blanket, dim the lights, and let the slow rhythm of the Ice Age guide us deeper. The day begins not with light, but with cold. Even before the first pale glow touches the horizon, the chill seeps into the shelters where families lie bundled together. The walls are stitched hides, thick with frost, and each breath drifts as a cloud into the dim space. The fire in the center has burned low in the night. Its ashes glow faintly, a soft red heartbeat in the dark. Someone stirs, a man or a woman. It doesn't matter. Life here does not favor anyone. They lean forward, feeding splinters of dry bone and scraps of wood into the coals. Slowly, the flames crackle to life, filling the hut with the smell of smoke and warmth. Children sleep in piles of fur, their faces tucked against the pelts of reindeer. Their breaths are shallow, soft, fragile in this harsh world. Outside, the wind screams across the plains, carrying with it the endless cold. When the clan rises, they do so in silence. A thin broth is shared, made from marrow, fat, and whatever scraps were left from the last hunt. There is no sweetness, no spice, only nourishment. Each sip matters. Each mouthful keeps hunger at bay for just a little longer. Soon, the hunters gather their weapons. Long spears tipped with sharpened bone or flint, each carved with care. They tie on heavy cloaks of fur, layering skin upon skin to keep the air from cutting too deep. Breath plumes around them as they step into the snow, their feet crunching through drifts hardened by the night. Behind them, the camp stirs. Women mend clothing with sinew thread, the needles carved from ivory. Children chase one another clumsily, their laughter muffled by the wind. Old ones sit quietly, wrapped in hides, eyes clouded but still sharp with memory. Out on the plain, the hunters' footsteps vanish quickly in the blowing snow. They walk for hours, sometimes days, tracking herds of bison, reindeer, or even the great mammoth. Each track in the snow is a whisper of hope. Each broken branch could mean survival, or nothing at all. The rhythm of their lives is steady, unyielding. Wake, hunt, mend, endure. Each day balanced against hunger, each night uncertain. Yet still, the fire burns, the shelters hold, and life continues in the frozen silence of the Ice Age. The sun, when it rises, offers little comfort. It is pale and distant, casting more light than warmth. The horizon glows faintly pink and silver, but the air remains sharp, biting at the skin. reminding every living thing that this is a world ruled by cold. The hunters move steadily. Their furs are heavy with frost, the edges stiffening with ice from their breath. Every step sinks into the snow, slow and deliberate. The ground beneath is hard as stone, frozen solid for months on end. There are no paths, no roads, only endless whiteness stretching in every direction. They stop often, crouching low, reading the signs of the land. A bent tuft of grass, brittle beneath its icy sheath, speaks of hooves passing. A faint hollow in the snow could be where an animal rested. The hunters do not speak much. Words are precious here. Instead, they use gestures, subtle points, nods, the raising of a spear. Meanwhile, back at camp, life revolves around the fire. Smoke curls upward through a small gap in the roof of hides, leaving the air inside thick, heavy, and sharp with the scent of char. A woman scrapes a hide with a stone blade, drawing it taut, softening it for clothing. Each stroke is repetitive, patient, the sound a steady rhythm against the silence. Nearby, a child plays with a carved bone figure, smoothed by many hands. It is not a toy in the modern sense, but perhaps something more, a small guardian, a symbol carried through generations. In a world so uncertain, such objects held meaning far greater than their shape. Food is always on the mind. Those who stay behind gather what they can. Roots buried deep beneath frost, bitter berries still clinging to branches, fragments of bone to be crushed for marrow. Nothing is wasted. Even the sinew of a hunted animal is pulled into long threads for sewing, the fat stored carefully to feed lamps that burn in the darkness. The rhythm of survival continues through the daylight. Tools are sharpened, hides repaired, bones carved into needles, awls and ornaments. The people of this age were not idle, even when storms kept them trapped indoors for days. Hands worked constantly, shaping, fixing, preparing, for tomorrow was always uncertain. And above them, always, the wind swept across the plains, carrying with it the distant calls of wolves. Sometimes the animals drew close to the edge of the camp, circling in the night. Fire kept them back, but only just. Predators knew the smell of humans, and they knew what it meant. A rival, another hunter in the frozen wilderness. In the midst of this, the clan clung to one another. Togetherness was their shield against hunger and cold. Alone, no one could last long. But together, they made it through the endless days and the harsher nights, carving out life from a world that seemed determined to push them back into silence. As the hunters press farther into the wilderness, the land begins to shift beneath their feet. The plains stretch wide, but here and there clusters of trees rise against the white expanse. Birch and pine, their branches heavy with snow. The silence within the trees is different from the open plain. It is hushed, watchful, filled with small sounds. The crack of ice, the whisper of a bird taking flight, the faint rustle of a hare slipping through the undergrowth. The hunters pause often to listen. Their ears are tuned to these subtleties, able to separate the ordinary from the extraordinary, the slight change that means prey is near. They move as one, each step careful, measured. Spears shift in their hands. They are not guaranteed a kill today. Days may pass without one, but still, they walk. Back at the camp, the sky darkens earlier than one expects. The daylight hours are short, and the fires must be tended constantly. Children gather wood, dragging branches and frozen brush from the edge of the settlement. It is a tiring task, for much of the wood is brittle. breaking before it reaches the fire. Yet without it, the night would be unbearable. Inside one of the huts, an elder hums softly while smoothing a piece of bone. The sound is low, rhythmic, like the wind itself. The bone will become a flute, a tool for sound, for voice beyond words. Such instruments have been found, carefully carved with holes designed to carry notes into the night. To imagine music in such a world is to understand something vital. Survival was not enough. They sought meaning, beauty, even here. The smell of cooking fat lingers in the air as dusk approaches. A pot is suspended above the flames, where scraps of meat boil slowly with herbs gathered in warmer months. The broth is thin but nourishing, and the warmth of it spreads through the body like fire itself. Families huddle close around the flames, dipping in carved wooden spoons, sharing each mouthful. The snow outside muffles all sound, wrapping the world in a blanket of quiet. Yet that quiet is never complete. Wolves howl in the distance, their calls rising and falling in waves. The people pause as they listen. It is not fear alone that grips them. There is also recognition. These animals live as they do, hungry, watchful, enduring. The sound is part of the rhythm of life here. When night finally falls, it does so with weight. Darkness is not something to take lightly in this world. Torches are lit. Lamps fueled by animal fat glow softly, casting shadows along the curved walls of the shelters. The wind howls harder now, pressing against the hides, making them shiver and snap. Inside, families curl together beneath layers of fur, pulling warmth from one another. The stars above are sharp and brilliant, filling the sky in numbers that seem endless. And somewhere, within that vast darkness, the hunters still walk, following tracks across the frozen earth, carrying the hopes of the entire clan on their shoulders. The hunters return under the cover of darkness. Their figures appear first as shadows on the horizon, spears glinting faintly in the moonlight. Snow clings to their furs, and their faces are lined with exhaustion. Whether they come carrying meat or not, the entire camp rises to greet them. For every return is uncertain. If they are successful, the air soon fills with the heavy smell of blood and fat carried on the cold wind. A reindeer, perhaps, is dragged into the camp. Knives of flint flash in the firelight as the work begins. Every part of the animal has its use. The hide for clothing, the bones for tools, the sinew for thread, the fat for lamps. Nothing is discarded, for to waste is to invite hunger. The butchering is solemn, rhythmic, almost ritualistic. Blades scrape, bones crack. Steam rises into the frozen night. Children watch with wide eyes, learning the motions they will someday perform themselves. The meat is cut into long strips, some roasted immediately, some set aside to dry in the frigid air. The promise of food steadies the hearts of all, and if the hunters return empty-handed, the scene is different. Silence settles like snow across the camp. Faces tighten, fires burn low. The last scraps of stored food are brought out reluctantly. Broth is thinned with extra water. The elders eat less so the children can have more. Hunger is not new to them. It is an old companion. They endure it as they endure the cold, patiently, without complaint. Later, when the fires burn high, stories are shared. Not in long speeches, but in fragments, half-sung chants, gestures in the firelight, murmurs that blend with the crackling wood. They speak of past hunts, of animals that towered above men, of ancestors who walked these same frozen lands. Their stories are not written, but they live in the breath of each teller. carried forward into the next generation. Outside, predators still circle. Eyes glint in the darkness, catching the firelight from the edge of the plain. But they do not come closer. The smell of smoke, the sharpness of human voices, the flare of flame, they hold the beasts at bay. The night deepens. Families draw together in their shelters, fires reduce to embers. The warmth is fragile, fleeting, but enough. Above them, the stars stretch across the heavens, cold and eternal. And in that vast silence, the rhythm of their lives continues. Day after day, night after night, they rise, they hunt, they endure. It is not comfort they seek, but survival. Each breath taken against the wind, each step pressed into the snow, a quiet victory. Long before cities rose, long before words were written, there was a place on the Russian plain where a small community buried one of their own. It was more than 30,000 years ago, in the depths of the Ice Age. The ground was hard with frost, yet they cut into it carefully, creating a resting place unlike any other. There, they laid to rest a young girl. She was not more than 12 or 13 years old, her life cut short before it could fully unfold. And yet, what remains of her tells us more than centuries of stone. She is remembered now as the Sunghir girl, named for the site where her grave was found. The burial was extraordinary. Around her body, archaeologists discovered thousands of ivory beads, each one painstakingly carved from mammoth tusk. To create even a single bead required hours of labor, shaping, smoothing, polishing. To create thousands was a task beyond measure. It meant that she was cherished, that her death was not treated as the ending of a burden, but as the passing of someone precious. Her body was also adorned with fox teeth, carefully arranged in patterns, and ivory bracelets polished to a soft sheen. By her head lay a spear carved from mammoth ivory, a weapon too delicate to be practical, yet too meaningful to be discarded. It was a symbol, a sign of care. Imagine the scene as it must have unfolded. The community gathered in silence. Fires burned low, casting light against the frost. One by one, the beads were laid in place, their whiteness gleaming faintly against the girl's small body. Mothers, fathers, elders, children, each might have held a piece, a final offering. Their voices may have murmured chants that have long since disappeared, their eyes fixed on the earth that would soon cover her. This was not survival alone. This was memory. This was meaning. In a world where food was scarce and the cold unyielding, they took time, days, perhaps weeks, to prepare a burial that would outlast their own lives. The Sunghir girl reminds us that even in the harshest age, people looked beyond hunger and shelter. They looked to remembrance. And now, 30,000 years later, we see her as they must have seen her. Not simply a child of the Ice Age, but a bridge, a reminder that humanity has always carried within it something more than endurance, something that reaches for beauty, for care, for belonging. The site of Sunghir lies near the modern city of Vladimir in western Russia. Today, the land is quiet, green with meadows and scattered with trees. But 30,000 years ago, it was a frozen plain, swept by icy winds. The people who lived there endured the same struggle as all Ice Age hunters: fire, food, and shelter. Yet the burials they left behind tell us that their world was also one of ceremony, ritual, and bonds that reached beyond death. Archaeologists uncovered not just the young girl's grave, but others nearby. 2 boys were found laid side by side, head to head, their bodies also covered with thousands of beads. One of them had a carved spear placed along his body, nearly 2 meters long, fashioned from mammoth ivory. These were not simple gestures of farewell. They were signs of immense effort, of long labor given freely for the dead. Each bead, when examined, shows the care of its maker. Tiny holes drilled carefully through the ivory, surfaces polished until smooth. The work was slow, steady, requiring patience in a world where time was often consumed by the urgency of hunger. To place thousands of such beads into a grave meant weeks of preparation. Perhaps the community gathered together, carving bead after bead, working in silence by the firelight, each hand contributing to the whole. The placement of the beads around the girl's body suggests clothing once covered her, lined so densely with decoration that it must have shimmered as she was lowered into the ground. Fox teeth were arranged like pendants, bracelets gleamed from her wrists. Ivory pins lay near her head. She was surrounded not by simple tools of survival, but by symbols of love, respect, and perhaps something more, belief. Some scholars think the Sungir burials show early signs of spiritual thought, that these people believed death was not an ending, but a passage. The gifts placed in the grave may have been meant for another world, another journey. Others argue it was about status, about marking the importance of certain individuals within the community. But beyond theories, one truth remains clear. She was not forgotten. In the moment of her burial, her community chose to pour their time, their energy, their care into honoring her life. She did not vanish without a trace. Instead, she was remembered in ivory and beadwork, her story carved into the earth itself. And 30,000 years later, when her grave was uncovered, those beads still gleamed faintly under the soil, small, pale echoes of hands that worked so long ago. When we look closely at the Sungir burials, it becomes clear that not every life was treated the same. Most Ice Age people were laid to rest with only a few objects, sometimes nothing at all. A body placed in the earth, perhaps with a stone tool nearby, perhaps wrapped in hides. But here, at Sungir, certain individuals received extraordinary attention. Thousands of beads, ivory spears, fox teeth, polished ornaments. Why? The young girl's age raises questions. She was not a leader of hunts, nor a seasoned elder. She did not yet carry the weight of years. And yet, her burial rivals those of great chiefs or shamans imagined in later societies. This tells us something about how her people thought. Perhaps she belonged to a family of status, where lineage determined honor. Or perhaps the beads were not about power, but about care, that even a child's brief life was worthy of immense remembrance. The two boys buried nearby deepen the mystery. One had severe physical disabilities, his legs twisted, his body fragile. In a world where survival demanded strength, such a child might not have been expected to live long. And yet, his grave was among the richest ever found. His body draped in beads, his head crowned with ornaments, a massive ivory spear placed beside him. This shows us something remarkable. Even those who could not hunt, who could not contribute to the daily struggle, were not discarded. They were honored. Their lives, however limited, carried weight and meaning. In this frozen landscape, survival was everything. But survival alone was not enough. Humanity was already moving towards something greater: community, compassion, and memory. Imagine the burial rites themselves, the air sharp with cold, fires burning low. The people gathered in silence, their faces drawn with hunger, their bodies wrapped in furs. Yet they paused from the rhythm of survival to carve, to polish, to prepare. The beads were strung together, the ornaments arranged carefully, the bodies placed with care. They lowered the children into the earth, covering them with soil and snow, and perhaps they sang. A chant, a murmur, a soft rhythm carried into the night. 30,000 years later, we hear none of those voices. But the beads still tell their story. They whisper of hands that worked patiently, of love given freely, of remembrance that refused to vanish into the snow. The Songhear girl and the boys who lay near her remind us that even in the harshest of times, humanity was not only about enduring, it was about seeing one another and ensuring that memory stretched beyond death. Archaeologists who uncovered the Songhear site in the mid-20th century were astonished by what they found. Beneath the soil lay not just one grave, but several, forming a small cluster of burials that spoke of community. The girl's grave, the double burial of the two boys, and the resting place of an older man. Together, they formed a story of life and death in a world long vanished. The older man's grave was also remarkable. His skeleton lay adorned with thousands of beads, just like the children. Around him were carved ivory objects, tools, and ornaments. His body told another kind of story. He bore marks of age and survival. Worn joints, broken bones healed long before death. He had lived many years, enduring hardships, yet still rising each day in a world that offered little kindness. His people remembered him not just as a survivor, but as someone worth honoring deeply. The presence of both children and elders, buried with equal care, suggests a society that valued more than strength alone. It was not only hunters or leaders who received reverence. It was those who were part of the whole, the fragile, the young, the old. Each one carried meaning. Each one was remembered. The sheer number of beads across these graves is staggering. Over 10,000 have been counted at Songhear. Each bead represents an act of patience, shaping, drilling, smoothing. Archaeologists have estimated that it could take nearly an hour to make just one. If this is true, then thousands of hours of human labor were invested in these burials. Days, weeks, perhaps even years of preparation. This effort is almost unimaginable in a world where survival pressed upon every moment. Why spend so much time on beads when every day demanded food, firewood, shelter? And yet, they did. This choice shows us something essential. The people of Songhear were not only hunters and gatherers, they were thinkers, dreamers, mourners. They understood the weight of memory. When the Songhear girl was lowered into the ground, she was not just one life ending. She was part of a story that stretched across generations. Her beads tied her to her people, her ornaments tied her to belief, and her grave tied her to the earth itself. In this way, she still speaks to us. 30,000 years later, her presence reminds us that humanity has always been more than survival. We have always sought to leave traces, shapes in ivory, beads in soil, stories carried forward in silence. The beads, more than anything, have become the silent voice of Songhear. They are small, fragile, and easily overlooked. Yet together, they form one of the most powerful messages of Ice Age life. Picture the process of making them. A hunter, seated by a fire, holds a fragment of mammoth ivory. With stone tools, he chips away at it, carving out a sliver small enough to hold in his palm. Hours pass as he rubs it against sandstone, smoothing the surface until it gleams faintly. A tiny hole is drilled, slowly, carefully, with a pointed tool. Then the bead is polished once more until it is ready to be strung. Now imagine this repeated thousands of times, bead after bead, day after day. It was not the work of one person, but of many, a community's labor, united by a purpose. Some beads might have been made by mothers, others by elders too frail to hunt, others by youths learning the patience of the craft. Each hand left its mark, invisible but real. The placement of the beads in the girl's grave suggests they were once sewn into her clothing. A coat lined so thickly that it shimmered with ivory. A cap, perhaps, edged with gleaming decoration. Bracelets or anklets strung with tiny pendants. When she lay down in death, she did not lie in rags, but in garments of memory and light. This was more than ornament. In the depths of the Ice Age, such clothing carried meaning. Perhaps it marked status, her family's wealth, or her importance within the group. Perhaps it was symbolic, each bead carrying a prayer, a wish for her journey beyond life. Or perhaps it was simply love, a family pouring every spare hour into honoring a child they could not keep. The ivory spear placed beside her deepens the sense of symbolism. Too fragile to be used in the hunt, it was a creation of ceremony. Its presence speaks of preparation for another world, a journey perhaps, where she would need protection or companionship. Archaeologists debate these meanings, but one truth is clear. Such labor was not given lightly. In a time when every moment was consumed by the need for food and fire, these people chose to dedicate uncountable hours to beauty, to remembrance, to care. The beads of Sunghe remind us of something easy to forget, that humanity's story has always included tenderness. Even in the coldest landscapes, people paused to shape ivory, to string it with patience, and to lay it gently around the body of a child. And when we see those beads today, gleaming faintly in museum cases, we are not looking at decorations. We are looking at love, carved into permanence 30,000 years ago. The more we study the Sunghe burials, the more we see patterns that suggest meaning beyond mere adornment. The beads, the ivory spears, the fox teeth, all of these required planning, not just in the moment of burial, but long before. This was not something done hastily, not a reaction to sudden death. It was the product of memory, of intention, of people preparing for an end they knew was coming. This suggests that the Sunghe community saw death as a passage rather than an ending. They may have believed that the girl and the boys buried nearby would continue their journey elsewhere. The beads, the ornaments, the symbolic spear, these were her companions, her garments for the next world. It is easy to imagine the moment of burial itself. A wide pit dug into the frozen ground, lined with hides, warmed by fire at its edges. The community gathered, silent except for the sound of wind moving across the plains. They placed the girl within, arranging her beads carefully, laying the ivory spear along her side. Perhaps they chanted softly or hummed low rhythms that echoed the heartbeat of the earth. Such rituals remind us that the people of the Ice Age were not only practical, not only concerned with the next meal. They carried stories and beliefs, even if we can no longer hear the words. They carried symbols, even if we can no longer fully interpret them. The graves also speak of social structure. Not everyone was buried this way. In fact, such elaborate burials are rare in the archaeological record. Most Ice Age people left behind only fragments, bones scattered, sometimes burned, sometimes placed with a single tool. But here, the richness is overwhelming. This suggests that some lives were marked as special. Was it wealth? Was it family standing? was its spiritual role? We cannot know for certain, but what is clear is that even in the Ice Age, not all were equal in death. The beads of Sunghir speak both of tenderness and of hierarchy. Still, the overwhelming impression is not of division, but of care. A young girl, only on the edge of her teenage years, was honored with thousands of hours of labor. Her life was short, fragile, uncertain, but her memory was made eternal. Today, when we look upon her burial, we do not see bones alone. We see a community speaking across time. We see hands that refuse to let her vanish into the snow. We see a world where, even in hardship, remembrance was more important than forgetting. Among the most striking details of the Sunghir burials is the contrast between the lives that were lived and the honors that were given. The two boys buried side by side offer a profound example. One of them showed clear signs of disability. His legs were bent, his spine uneven, his body fragile. In a world where every step across the snow was a struggle for survival, such a condition would have made daily life nearly impossible. He could not have hunted mammoth, carried heavy loads, or traveled far with the band. And yet, his grave was among the richest of all. Thousands of beads surrounded him. Fox teeth, ivory ornaments, a mammoth ivory spear nearly as long as his body, all carefully arranged. His burial was not one of neglect or dismissal, but of extraordinary care. This tells us something profound about the people of Sunghir. They did not measure worth solely by strength, or by what someone could provide to the group in the hunt. They valued presence, belonging, identity. Even those who might have been considered a burden in purely practical terms were cherished in death. Perhaps this reflects compassion at a level deeper than survival. Perhaps this young boy had another role: storyteller, keeper of memory, singer of chants. Or perhaps his worth lay simply in being part of the whole, in being loved by his kin. Whatever the reason, his burial shows us that Ice Age people carried a sense of humanity that reached far beyond necessity. The other boy in the double grave was different, physically stronger, but equally honored. He too was covered in beads and ornaments, his body placed head to head with the disabled boy, as though their bond in life continued into death. Were they brothers, companions, relatives joined not by blood, but by adoption? We cannot know. Yet the care taken in arranging their shared grave speaks of closeness, of relationship, of a story now silent. The placement of their bodies was deliberate, symbolic. Head to head, feet pointing away, their ornaments balanced. It was not random. It was a statement, even if we can no longer translate the words. Archaeologists often debate whether such burials were signs of status or signs of love. Were these children heirs to families of prominence, their wealth marked even in death? Or were they simply remembered more deeply because of their uniqueness? Perhaps the truth lies somewhere between. What remains is the fact itself. In the frozen world of the Ice Age, where each day was a struggle against hunger, people chose to dedicate immense effort to the remembrance of children. The graves at Sunghir remind us that human worth was never measured only by survival. It was measured by connection, by memory, by belonging. The older man buried at Sunghir adds another layer to the story. His grave, too, was rich with beads. Thousands of them, sewn once into his clothing, gleaming faintly in the soil after tens of thousands of years. Alongside him were ivory tools, ornaments, and symbols of care that spoke of a long life honored at its end. His skeleton shows signs of hardship, joints worn from years of walking across the plains, bones marked by healed injuries, reminders of hunts that had gone wrong, of falls on icy ground. He had survived much. Each scar was a memory carved into his body. Yet he had endured, and in death, his people made sure that endurance was not forgotten. The contrast between the children's burials and his is striking. Youth and age, weakness and strength, fragility and survival, all were honored equally. This suggests that Sungheer society did not place value only on what a person could do, but on what a person was. A child, an elder, a disabled boy, all were woven into the same pattern of remembrance. The presence of so many beads across multiple graves also suggests a tradition, a shared ritual passed from one burial to the next. This was not a single moment of care, but a way of marking life and death, repeated across years, perhaps generations. To carve beads was to participate in memory itself. Each one strung was an act of remembrance. Archaeologists studying the site have estimated that the combined labor for all the beads at Sungheer might represent tens of thousands of hours. This was not the work of one family, but of an entire community. It required cooperation, dedication, and a shared sense of purpose. What does this tell us about their world? It tells us that meaning was as essential as meat, that even as they struggled to endure the cold, they paused to create symbols that would last, that they carried within them a sense of time that stretched beyond a single life. Imagine the moment when the older man was laid to rest. The younger members of the group might have stood in silence, watching as elders arranged his ornaments. They may have remembered stories he had told, hunts he had led, lessons he had given. His beads were not only decorations, they were fragments of memory, bound into objects that would outlast even the snow. The Sungheer graves taken together form a tapestry. They tell us of a people who endured hardship but refused to let their dead vanish. They tell us of a community where life was honored, no matter how brief, no matter how fragile. And they tell us of something else, something deeper, a glimpse of belief, of ritual, of the earliest roots of what we now call culture. When we reflect on the burials at Sungheer, a question lingers. Why here, and why these people? The Ice Age stretched across continents. Hunters and gatherers roamed the plains of Europe, Asia, and beyond. Yet not every site reveals such rich and careful burials. In fact, Sungheer stands out as one of the most elaborate ritual sites known from this era. Some archaeologists suggest that Sungheer was more than a settlement. It may have been a gathering place, a site where clans met, traded, and shared rituals. The graves could represent individuals of special significance, leaders, shamans, or figures tied to myth and memory. Others propose that the richness of the burials reflected lineage, families of prominence who marked their dead with tokens of wealth and power. But another possibility lies deeper in the human heart. Perhaps these burials were less about rank and more about grief. The death of a child, the loss of a respected elder, such moments cut deeply, even in a world where death was common. And sometimes, grief drives people to extraordinary acts. Thousands of beads, an ivory spear, garments lined with ornaments. These may not have been displays of power, but of sorrow. A way of holding on to someone who could no longer walk the frozen earth. What is most moving is the time invested. In the daily struggle for survival, time was as valuable as food. To carve one bead took hours. To make thousands meant sacrificing days of labor that might have gone to hunting or gathering. And yet, they chose to give this time. The beads are a record not just of skill, but of devotion. Even the placement of the graves carries meaning. The double burial of the boys, The careful positioning of the girl, the elder nearby, this was not random. It was spatial memory, a way of linking their lives together even after death. The earth itself became a storybook, each grave a sentence, each bead a word. In the silence of the Russian plain, under skies heavy with stars, these people created a memory that would outlast them. They could not have known we would one day unearth their work. They could not have imagined the tools, the lights, the glass cases that would hold their beads. But perhaps they did not need to. Their intention was not for us, but for themselves, for their community, their kin, their children yet unborn. And still, the message reached us. Across 30,000 years, their hands still speak. They tell us that humanity has always searched for more than survival. That even in the harshest winters, love, grief, and memory carved their way into the fabric of life. To understand Sungir fully, we must imagine the world in which these people lived. The Russian plain 30,000 years ago was vast and cold. Winters were long, summers short and mild. Herds of mammoth, reindeer, and bison roamed the land, followed closely by predators, lions, hyenas, wolves, each locked in the same struggle for survival. The people of Sungir lived in tents of hide or in shelters built from mammoth bones, clustered together for warmth. Every day was shaped by necessity, hunting, gathering, preparing food, mending clothing. Yet beneath this rhythm of survival, there was also a rhythm of meaning. The beads, the burials, the ornaments, all of these point to a society that carried more than instincts. They carried belief. When archaeologists examine the Sungir burials, they see signs of early ritual. The arrangement of the bodies, the symbolic objects, the uniformity of the beads, all suggest ceremony. It is possible these people had chants, prayers, or gestures tied to death. Perhaps they believed in spirits that walked beside them, ancestors who lingered in the snow. Perhaps they imagined a world beyond, where the girl and the boys would continue the journey that life had cut short. What makes this so powerful is not the certainty of what they believed, but the fact that they believed at all. Belief requires imagination, and imagination requires a mind that sees beyond the present. The burials at Sungir tell us that 30,000 years ago, humans were already shaping unseen worlds, already filling silence with meaning. The ivory spear is a particularly striking symbol. It is too fragile to have been used in hunting. Its length, nearly 2 meters, was impractical. It was not made for function, but for ceremony. Perhaps it was a token of leadership, or a gift for the afterlife. Perhaps it was a symbol of identity, a marker of who the child was, or who the community wished him to be remembered as. When we stand before the reconstructed grave today, beads arranged as they once were, it is impossible not to feel a sense of connection. Here is the evidence of grief. Here is the evidence of love. Here is the evidence of imagination. Across 30 millennia, we recognize ourselves in them. The Sungir girl's burial and the others that surround her are not just archaeological finds. They are windows. They allow us to glimpse the humanity of people who lived in a world almost unimaginably different from ours, and yet, in the most important ways, the same. They loved, they remembered, they dreamed, and in their careful work preserved by frost and soil, they ensured that those dreams would not vanish entirely. The discoveries at Sungir changed how we think about Ice Age humanity. For many years, the image of our distant ancestors was one of mere survival. Rough figures huddled in caves, their lives reduced to the hunt and the fire. But the Sungir burials challenged that narrow picture. They remind us that culture, compassion, and imagination were present even in the harshest landscapes. Take the beads once more. Their sheer number reveals organization. To produce thousands, the community must have shared the work, coordinated the labor, and planned for months. This was not random, not the scattered effort of individuals. It was collective. It required memory, patience, and vision. The fact that so many beads survived also suggests that they were not thrown together at the last moment. They were part of garments long before death, worn, polished by use, perhaps treasured as family heirlooms. When the girl and the boys died, their garments were not stripped away to be reused. They were buried with them, carried into the soil. This choice, giving away valuable clothing in a world of scarcity, speaks volumes. It was a sacrifice, a gift offered to memory. The ivory ornaments, too, show artistry that extends beyond utility. Bracelets, pins, decorated spears. These were not made for survival. They were made for meaning. They tell us that even 30,000 years ago, people were shaping beauty from the bones of the world. What lingers most is the sense of time. These people lived in a landscape where every day was uncertain, where hunger could come at any moment, where cold pressed endlessly. And yet, they created objects that endured beyond their own lives. They carved beads that outlasted them, garments that carried their memory into the earth, graves that would speak for millennia. It is tempting to think of this as the beginning of history, not written on stone or paper, but written in ivory and soil. The people of Sungheer left no words, but they left us meaning, and meaning, preserved across the gulf of time, is its own form of language. When we look upon the Sungheer girl's burial, we see not only a child, but a community speaking to itself. She mattered. We will not forget her. And in honoring her, they told us something about themselves, that survival was not their only story. It was never just about enduring the cold. It was about carrying memory even through the snow. The Sungheer girl rests now not in the frozen soil of her homeland, but in a museum. Her beads, once gleaming faintly in firelight, are displayed under glass. Her bones, fragile with age, are studied with tools her people could not have imagined. And yet, despite the distance of time, her presence remains powerful. She speaks without words. Her burial tells us that 30,000 years ago, people did more than endure. They paused, they remembered, they created meaning. In a world of cold winds and prowling predators, they still found time for beauty, for ritual, for care. Her story bridges a gap that often feels wide, the gulf between the so-called primitive and the modern. When we look upon her, we see that humanity has always been more than hunger and fire. We have always carried tenderness. We have always sought to mark the lives that pass too quickly. The thousands of beads around her body were not survival tools. They could not feed a clan or shelter a child. Yet they mattered enough for her people to give their time, their energy, their hope. In those beads, we glimpse the roots of memory itself. They are whispers from a people who refused to let a child vanish without trace. And so, the Sungheer girl remains. She lies not just in soil or museum cases, but in our understanding of what it means to be human. She shows us that love, grief, and memory are not modern inventions. They are ancient companions, carried across ice and snow, shaping us from the beginning. When we step back from her story, we can still feel the quiet rhythm of her world, the crackling fire, the biting wind, the careful hands shaping ivory beads. She lived briefly, but through her, the humanity of her people endures. The wind still sweeps across the Russian plains. The soil still holds echoes of footsteps long gone. And somewhere, beneath it all, her memory still lingers, whispering the truth, that even in the harshest of times, humanity has always remembered. Across the plains and mountains of Ice Age Europe, deep inside caves, there are marks that have outlasted time itself. Red ochre dots, black hand stencils, animals etched into stone. These are not the tools of survival. They are not spears or clothing or fires. They are something else. Expressions of imagination, traces of thought made visible. The earliest of these paintings stretch back more than 30,000 years, perhaps even farther. At sites like Chauvet in France, Altamira in Spain, and El Castillo in the Cantabrian Mountains, archaeologists have found walls covered in animals: bison, horses, mammoth, lions. The pigments are simple: charcoal, iron oxides, manganese. But the images are complex, full of life and motion. Why did Ice Age people paint these images? The answer remains one of archaeology's greatest mysteries. Some scholars believe they were hunting magic, depictions of animals meant to ensure success in the hunt. Others think they were spiritual symbols, connected to rituals we cannot reconstruct. Still, others argue they were the first forms of storytelling, narratives not spoken, but shown. The hand stencils are especially haunting. To make them, a person pressed their palm against the wall of a cave and blew pigment across it, leaving behind a ghostly outline. Thousands of years later, we can still place our own hands over theirs, matching finger to finger, palm to palm. It is a moment of connection across the abyss of time, a reminder that they were not so different from us. Imagine walking into such a cave. The air is cool and still, heavy with the scent of damp stone. The flicker of torchlight makes the painted animals shift and move, as though they are alive. In the silence, the walls seem to breathe with memory. You stand among shadows, but also among voices. Voices that spoke not in sound, but in color. These paintings tell us something essential, that even when survival pressed hard, humans sought beauty. They sought ways to reach beyond the immediate hunger of the body into the wider hunger of the mind. The Ice Age was not only a time of cold winds and frozen ground, it was also a time of wonder, of imagination, of marks made to endure. And though we may never know exactly why they painted, we know this: the act itself was powerful. To place pigment on stone was to declare presence. To say, we were here, we saw, we remembered. The caves themselves are as much a mystery as the paintings. Why did Ice Age people venture so deep into the earth to leave their marks? Many of the painted chambers are far from the entrances, dark, hidden, reachable only by narrow passages. To reach them, one had to carry torches, crawl through tight spaces, and step into the silence of the underground. It was not done casually. It required purpose. Some archaeologists believe the caves were sacred places. The act of entering them may have been like a journey into another world. The flickering torchlight on the walls, the echo of footsteps in the dark, the sudden appearance of painted animals. It may have felt like crossing into a realm of spirits. The paintings could have been offerings, prayers, or invocations made in the heart of the earth. At Chauvet, lions stalk across the walls, drawn with skill that still astonishes modern eyes. At Altamira, bison seem to shift in the light, their backs curving along the bulges of stone, as if the rock itself had become part of the animal. At El Castillo, dots of red pigment line the walls. One of them dated to more than 40,000 years ago, making it one of the oldest known artworks on Earth. The pigments themselves were not always easy to obtain. Red ochre required gathering iron-rich soil, grinding it to powder, and mixing it with fat or water. Black came from charcoal or manganese, sometimes carried from miles away. This was effort, not accident, and the choice of colors, red for life, black for shadow, may have carried meaning we can only guess at. Hand stencils, scattered across caves from France to Indonesia, carry a special resonance. They are not just pictures of animals, but imprints of the self. Each hand is unique, each one belonging to a person who once lived and breathed. They may have been signatures, marks of belonging, or even part of rituals. Some hands are small, belonging to children, suggesting that entire families entered the caves. Standing before them today, archaeologists feel the same pull that anyone would, a sense of presence. It is as though the walls whisper, reminding us that human beings were here, imagining, expressing, reaching out. The Ice Age world was unforgiving, but within the caves, people carved out a space for something beyond survival. A place for mystery, for ritual, for beauty that was not necessary, but was essential. The mystery of cave art deepens when we look closely at the details. Many of the animals painted on cave walls were not the ones most commonly hunted. Horses, lions, mammoths, woolly rhinoceroses, creatures powerful, dangerous, sometimes rarely killed for food, are shown again and again. Reindeer, which were far more important for daily survival, appear far less often. This suggests that the paintings were not simply practical guides to hunting, but something more symbolic. Some scholars suggest that the painted animals held spiritual significance. Perhaps each species carried a meaning beyond its flesh. A mammoth as a guardian, a lion as a rival, a horse as a spirit of movement. Others argue that the walls were a place of teaching, where elders showed the young not just what animals looked like, but how they fit into a greater order of the world. Another theory is that the flickering torchlight itself was part of the magic. In the deep dark of a cave, shadows move strangely. A painted bison might seem to walk, a lion to stalk, a horse to gallop across the stone. The cave, alive with flame and echo, may have felt like a living theatre, an early form of performance where the walls themselves joined the ritual. Archaeologists have also found marks that do not represent animals at all. Clusters of dots, zigzag lines, strange symbols repeated from site to site. Some researchers think these were early forms of notation, records of seasons, hunts, or cycles of the moon. Others see them as abstract symbols, tied to beliefs now long forgotten. Whatever their meaning, they show that Ice Age people were not only painting what they saw, but also what they imagined. Hand stencils again carry particular weight. Some appear with fingers missing or bent, as if the maker held their hand in a deliberate gesture. Were these signs, signals, ritual postures? We cannot know, but the choice was intentional. Each one a frozen moment of decision, left on stone for millennia. Imagine being there in the moment of painting. The cave silent except for the crackle of fire. A figure kneels, places their hand against the wall, and blows pigment across their skin. When they pull away, the outline remains, a shadow of presence, a mark that says, "I was here." And in that act, perhaps without knowing, they ensured that thousands of years later, another hand would trace the same outline, feeling the same connection. The mystery of cave art lies in this. We may never know precisely what it meant, but we know it mattered. It mattered enough to risk darkness, to carry pigments, to leave marks in hidden places. It mattered enough to endure. Not all Ice Age art was hidden deep in caves. Some of it traveled with people, carried in their hands, in their clothing, in the small objects that accompanied them on their journeys. Archaeologists call these portable artworks figurines carved from ivory, pendants shaped from bone, tools decorated with lines and curves that served no practical purpose. Among the most famous are the so-called Venus figurines. Found across Europe, from France to Siberia, these small carvings depict human forms, usually women, their features rounded, exaggerated, abstract. Some are only a few inches tall, yet the detail can be striking. The curve of a hip, the outline of hair, the weight of the figure. What did they mean? Scholars still debate. Some believe they were fertility symbols, connected to hopes for abundance, of food, of children, of survival. Others think they may have been charms, carried for protection, or teaching tools, used to pass down knowledge of the body. Whatever their purpose, their presence shows us again that Ice Age people created not only what they needed, but what they imagined. Other portable objects are more subtle. Pendants made of pierced animal teeth, worn around the neck. Beads strung into necklaces, similar to those found in the burials at Sungir. Ivory rods carved with delicate cross-hatching. Even spear throwers, practical hunting tools, sometimes bore intricate carvings of animals along their length. Utility was never enough. Beauty accompanied survival, stitched into the objects of daily life. The choice of material carried meaning too. Mammoth ivory, heavy and luminous, was a favorite medium. To carve it was to connect with the largest and most powerful animal of their world. Fox teeth, wolf claws, bird bones, all were chosen not only for their form, but for their symbolism. The Ice Age hunter did not live apart from animals. They lived among them, with them, and through them. Imagine a necklace of beads worn against fur clothing. Each bead polished by hand, each one shining faintly in the firelight as the wearer moved. Such an object was not just decoration. It was a story carried on the body, a reminder of the hours of labor, the love of those who made it, the identity of the one who wore it. These portable works also meant mobility of meaning. Unlike cave paintings, which stayed rooted in stone, figurines, pendants, and ornaments could travel. They could move with the people as they followed the herds, as they crossed rivers, as they faced new landscapes. In this way, memory itself was portable. Culture was not left behind, but carried forward, bead by bead, carving by carving. The art of the Ice Age, whether painted on stone or carried in hand, tells us that even in the most fragile of worlds, humans shape symbols to last. They made beauty a companion to survival. Among the most intriguing mysteries of Ice Age culture is the use of color. Red ochre, in particular, appears again and again. It stains bones, covers beads, fills hand stencils, and lines cave walls. Archaeologists find it sprinkled in burials, smeared on tools, and stored in small containers, carried from place to place. Why red? The answer may never be certain, but many believe the color carried deep symbolic weight. Red is the color of blood, of fire, of life itself. To spread it on the body, or on the bones of the dead, may have been to mark a connection to vitality, to renewal, to the forces that sustained existence. Others think it may have represented the earth itself, iron-rich, grounding, eternal. At Sungir, traces of ochre were found in the burials. The beads, the ornaments, Even the bones themselves bore faint stains of red. This was not decoration by chance. It was a deliberate act, a choice repeated across cultures and across thousands of years. The gathering of ochre required effort. It was mined from iron-rich soil or rock, ground into powder, and mixed with fat, water, or plant oils. Carried in small pouches, it could be applied in ceremonies, used in art, or worn on the body. The labor of preparing it shows its importance. This was not just dirt, it was color with meaning. Other pigments appear too. Black from charcoal, brown from manganese, white from powdered bone. But none are as widespread, as persistent, as red ochre. Its presence stretches across continents, from Africa to Europe to Asia, spanning tens of thousands of years. It is one of the few constants of prehistoric humanity. Some researchers suggest that ochre was more than symbolic. It may have been practical, used to preserve hides, protect skin, or repel insects. But the context in which it is found, burials, art, ritual spaces, point beyond practicality. It was both useful and meaningful, both tool and symbol. Imagine a burial ceremony lit by fire. The people gather around, their hands stained with red ochre. They sprinkle it over the body, over the beads, over the earth itself. The color glows in the firelight, vivid against the pale snow outside. In that moment, death is marked not only with silence, but with color. The ochre carries the body from life into memory, from presence into absence. The persistence of ochre reminds us of something profound. Across the vast distances of time and space, humans have always sought to mark their world with color. To take the plain and make it vivid, to take the ordinary and make it sacred. Red, the color of life, the color of fire, became the bridge between the living and the dead. If the beads of Sunghir remind us of care, and the cave paintings remind us of imagination, then ochre reminds us of ritual. The repeated use of red pigment in so many different contexts suggests a thread of meaning woven through Ice Age life. But it was not the only mystery. There are marks left behind that defy easy explanation. Geometric patterns, abstract symbols, repeated again and again across distant regions. On cave walls, alongside animals and hand stencils, we find zigzags, grids, spirals and dots. At first glance, they may seem random, scratches in stone, idle marks. But when archaeologists compared them across dozens of sites, patterns emerged. Certain shapes, like ladder-like forms, clusters of parallel lines or branching trees, appear in caves hundreds of miles apart. Could these be the first forms of notation? Some researchers believe they may represent records of the seasons, tallies of hunts, or counts of lunar cycles. Others argue they may have been symbolic, representations of water, fire, plants, or spirits. Without words to accompany them, their meaning remains hidden, but their repetition is undeniable. Another mystery lies in carved bones and antlers found across Ice Age Europe. Some are etched with repeated lines or notches, grouped in ways that suggest counting. Were they calendars, tracking the movement of the moon or the passing of herds? Or were they tally sticks, recording debts, exchanges, or moments of importance? Each notch was deliberate, each mark intentional. The meaning has slipped away, but the presence of order remains. Imagine a hunter seated by the fire, scratching marks into bone with a sharp flint. Each stroke means something to him, something he does not need to explain. He carries the bone with him as he travels, the notches growing in number, a record of something now lost to us. When he dies, the bone falls into the soil. Thousands of years later, it emerges, the mark still sharp, but the message silent. What is most striking about these abstract symbols is their persistence. They were not isolated experiments. They appear across sites, across centuries, across entire regions. This suggests a shared language, not spoken, but visual. A way of remembering, of transmitting, of carrying thought beyond the moment. We may never decode these marks fully, but in their silence lies something important. They show us that Ice Age people were already reaching for systems, for structures, for ways of organizing the world. They were not only artists, they were thinkers, observers, creators of meaning that stretched beyond the present. The caves and bones whisper to us still. There was more here than survival. There was knowledge, carried forward in marks and lines, remembered in silence and preserved in stone. Among the deepest puzzles of Ice Age art is the question of audience. Who were these works made for? Were they for the living community, gathered in the flickering light of the caves? Were they for the spirits of the animals and ancestors? Or were they for the painters themselves, an act of expression never meant to be seen by many? Some caves, like Chauvet and Lascaux, contain chambers so deep and narrow that only a few could enter at a time. Crawling through the darkness with torches, breathing heavy in the stale air, reaching the painted walls must have felt like crossing a boundary. The act of painting there was almost certainly not casual. It had weight. It is possible the paintings were never meant for wide viewing. Instead, they may have been part of rituals carried out by small groups, perhaps by shamans or spiritual leaders. The effort of reaching the chamber, the atmosphere of shadow and flame, may have been as important as the images themselves. Yet some evidence suggests communal gatherings. At certain sites, charcoal from torches lit fires large enough to illuminate broad chambers. Smoke still stains the ceilings. These spaces could have held groups of people watching as animals danced on the walls in flickering light. Storytelling may have been part of the ritual. Spoken words woven with painted images, sound and color blending into memory. The presence of children's hand stencils complicates the picture. Small palms pressed against stone suggest that the young, too, were part of these journeys. Did families enter the caves together? Did children participate in the rituals, leaving their marks alongside those of their parents? If so, then cave art was not only sacred, but communal, something shared across generations. We can only imagine what it felt like, the silence broken by chanting, the sound of flutes made from bird bone, the beat of hands against hollow stone, shadows moving like living creatures on the walls, the sense that the cave was not only a place, but a presence. For modern eyes, these images are fragments, but for Ice Age people, they were whole experiences, sight, sound, movement, and meaning all bound together. The audience was not only human. It may have included the animals themselves, their spirits called into the chamber through painted forms. It may have included ancestors, invoked by handprints pressed against the walls. Whoever the audience was, one truth remains: the paintings mattered. They mattered enough to risk the darkness, to carry pigment, to leave marks that could last beyond lifetimes. The caves still hold their silence. The walls still bear their marks. And the question lingers: who was meant to see them? One of the most haunting discoveries in Ice Age archaeology is the presence of footprints left deep inside caves. At sites in France and Spain, the floor still preserves the tracks of people who walked there tens of thousands of years ago. Some belong to adults, others to children. In one cave, small footprints follow alongside those of a wolf, as if the animal and the human moved together through the darkness. These prints remind us that the caves were not silent places of art alone. They were places of movement, of ritual, of life. A child may have held a torch, their shadow flickering against the wall as they followed their elders deeper into the earth. The ground beneath them, soft with clay, preserved the moment. And when they left, the silence of the cave sealed it away until our time. At Rouffignac Cave in France, archaeologists found long trails of finger marks scratched into the soft walls, as though people had dragged their hands along while walking. Some are simple lines, others spirals and shapes, the movement of bodies as much as the movement of minds. These marks may have been idle, but they may also have been deliberate. Ritual gestures, paths traced in shadow and firelight. The caves are filled not only with images of animals, but with echoes of presence. Ash from torches lies buried in layers. Fire pits sit in corners, where people pause to rest. Chewed fragments of plants, perhaps used as medicine or ritual, remain in the soil. The evidence is fragmentary, yet together it paints a picture of activity that was not just practical, but meaningful. The footprints of children are especially powerful. They show that the youngest were not excluded from these journeys into darkness. They walked the same paths as their parents, pressed their hands against the same walls, left their own marks in pigment and clay. Their inclusions suggest that rituals were not hidden knowledge, but shared experience, passed down through touch, through sight, through sound. Imagine a night when the community gathered outside a cave. The air is sharp with cold, stars shining bright above. Torches are lit, voices low, and a small group enters. Inside they move carefully, feet sinking into clay, the smell of smoke filling the passage. A child holds an elder's hand, their steps small but steady. They reach the chamber where animals glow in the firelight, and together they sit in silence, listening to the echoes of stone. The footprints still remain, silent witnesses to those moments. They remind us that the caves were not only for the dead or for the hunters. They were for everyone, for families, for communities, for those who wish to see and remember. The marks on the floor are not art, but they are memory, and they carry the same quiet message: we were here. The sounds of the caves are another mystery, one we are only beginning to understand. When researchers began studying the acoustics of painted chambers, they noticed something remarkable. Many of the best artworks were placed in areas where echoes were strongest. A clap, a chant, or the blow of a bone flute would bounce from the walls, amplifying in strange and powerful ways. It seems the people of the Ice Age did not only see the caves as spaces of image, but as spaces of sound. To paint a bison where the echo of a drum was loudest, or to place hand stencils in a chamber where voices carried, was to bind art and music together. The caves may have been instruments in themselves, resonating with ritual. Evidence of music has been found elsewhere too. At sites in Germany, archaeologists uncovered flutes made from bird bone and mammoth ivory, carefully carved with finger holes. When reconstructed, they play notes that are hauntingly familiar, capable of carrying simple melodies. It is one of the oldest forms of music ever discovered, 35,000 years old, yet still able to fill the air with sound. Imagine the scene. A fire flickers against the walls, the painted animals shifting in the light. A hunter lifts a bone flute to his lips. The notes echo in the chamber, mingling with the shadows, the voices, the beat of hands against stone. The cave itself responds, amplifying the sound, turning music into presence. Such rituals may have blended every sense: sight, sound, touch, even smell, the smoke of torches, the cool dampness of stone, the rhythmic vibrations of sound. The cave was not simply a gallery. It was a living environment, a place where humans stepped into something larger than themselves. Some archaeologists believe these experiences were tied to altered states of consciousness. The deep darkness, the flickering light, the echoing sounds, all of it may have brought participants into trances, visions, or dreams. In such states, the painted animals may have seemed alive. The handprints may have pulsed with presence. The symbols may have carried voices. We cannot know what they felt, but we can sense the intention. These were not idle acts. They were journeys, performances, rituals that bound people together and tied them to the unseen. The mystery of Ice Age sound is that it leaves little trace. Music vanishes as soon as it is played. Chants fade. Footsteps fall silent. Yet in the caves, the echoes still linger. A clap today will bounce from the same walls it did 30,000 years ago. A flute played in the chamber will still carry the same notes. The memory of sound remains even when the voices are gone. The caves remind us that art was never only visual. It was rhythm, resonance, vibration. The heartbeat of a people carried into stone. Another puzzle of Ice Age art lies in the question of who created it. The images are so carefully drawn, so well placed on the contours of the stone, that some scholars believe only a few individuals, specialists, perhaps shamans or storytellers, were responsible. Others argue the art was more communal, with many contributing in their own ways. Hand stencils give us clues. They include men's hands, women's hands, even children's. This suggests that everyone, regardless of age or sex, had some role in leaving their mark. The paintings of animals, however, often show a high level of skill. The perspective, the sense of movement, the precision of lines, all hint at practice, at someone who had painted before. Could it be that within these Ice Age bands, there were people who held special roles as artists? Perhaps not in the way we think of professional artists today, but as individuals with knowledge of pigments, of shapes, of rituals. They may have been guides, leading others into the caves, showing them where to place their hands, how to see the animals in the curves of stone. Some researchers think these artists were also spiritual figures. In many hunter-gatherer societies, the shaman holds the role of mediator between the living and the unseen. The act of painting, in this view, was not only creative but spiritual, drawing animals onto the walls as a way of connecting with their spirits, ensuring balance between hunter and prey. Yet the evidence of children's hands complicates the picture again. If shamans alone held the brush, why are children's prints scattered across the caves? It may be that art was layered. Skilled figures painted the animals, while the community added their marks, their presence, their signatures of belonging. Imagine such a moment. A figure kneels with a torch, grinding pigment into powder. Another mixes it with fat in a small stone bowl. The artist paints, careful strokes forming the curve of a mammoth's back. Around them, children press their hands against the wall. Parents blow pigment across the outlines. Elders murmur chants. It is both an individual act and a shared ritual, weaving together skill and community. The question of who painted remains unanswered, but the marks suggest a truth deeper than any single role. These caves were not only the work of one person, but of many hands, many breaths, many moments gathered together. The artists of the Ice Age, whether few or many, left behind something larger than themselves. They left memory made visible, the rhythm of survival transformed into lines, dots, and animals that still breathe on the stone. The mystery of Ice Age art is not only about what was created, but also about what was not. When we study the caves, one detail stands out: the absence of landscapes. There are no mountains, no rivers, no trees drawn on the walls. Human figures are rare, and when they appear, they are often abstract or distorted. Instead, the overwhelming focus is on animals, powerful, moving, alive. Why? Perhaps the animals represented more than food. They were rivals, companions, and forces greater than humans. To paint a bison or a lion was not to capture prey. It was to acknowledge a presence, a spirit that shared the world. In a life shaped by the hunt, animals were both sustenance and danger, both gift and threat. The paintings may have been acts of respect, of recognition, even of negotiation. The rarity of human figures suggests humility. People may have seen themselves as small within a world ruled by greater powers. To paint animals was to honor them, to place them at the center of meaning. Humans, fragile and temporary, were less important than the creatures that carried their survival. The absence of landscape is also telling. Perhaps the caves themselves were the landscape. The stone, the walls, the chambers. The contours of the rock became the hills and valleys, the surfaces where animals lived and moved. In torchlight, the bulges of stone shaped the bodies of mammoth and bison, the curves of horses' necks. The cave was not background, but canvas and world combined. This selective vision shows us something about how Ice Age people thought. They did not need to depict everything around them. They chose what mattered most. The animals were the center of life, the rhythm of existence, the measure of danger and survival. To place them on the walls was to tell the story of being human in that time. And yet, within the absence of humans, we find the presence of hands. Hand stencils scattered across walls stand in contrast to the animal paintings. They are not detailed, not elegant, not skilled. They are simple, immediate, unmistakably personal. Each one says, "I was here too." So the caves speak in layers. Animals for the spirit, for the hunt, for the shared world. Hands for the self, for the living, for presence. Landscapes and human bodies are absent, but perhaps that absence is also meaning, a sign that the focus of life was always beyond the self, always tied to the greater forces that walked beside them. The mystery remains unsolved, but the silence of what was not painted is as powerful as what was. The caves remind us that meaning is as much in absence as in presence, in silence as in song. The mystery of Ice Age art and ritual will never be fully solved. The pigments, the handprints, the carved beads, the echoes of music, all of them are fragments, pieces of a language we no longer speak. And yet, in those fragments, we catch glimpses of something deeply familiar. The people of 30 or 40,000 years ago did not write books, did not build cities, did not leave monuments of stone, but they left marks, marks on bone, on ivory, on cave walls, marks that spoke of beauty, of belief, of the need to remember. They sought to connect with animals, with spirits, with one another. They sought to leave something behind that was more than flesh and bone. The caves are silent now, their fires long extinguished. The footprints of children lie frozen in clay. The echoes of flutes have faded into stillness, but the images remain. Bison still stand in red pigment. Lions still stalk in charcoal. Hands still stretch across stone, palm to palm with those who will never meet them. When we enter these caves today, with electric lights and careful steps, we step into their world, Not entirely, but enough to feel its rhythm. We feel the cool air, hear the echoes of our voices, see the animals in flickering light. And in that moment, we share in something universal, the need to create, to mark, to remember. The mysteries remain unsolved, but perhaps they are not meant to be solved. Perhaps the beauty of Sungir, of Chauvet, of Altamira, lies in their silence. They invite us not to decode but to listen, to accept that across tens of thousands of years, the human impulse to leave meaning behind is the same. And so the caves, the beads, the pigments, and the stencils carry a quiet message across time. We were here, we lived, we endured, and we remembered. The Ice Age is often imagined as a world of simple equality. Small bands of hunters and gatherers moving together across frozen plains, each person contributing what they could. And in many ways, this was true. Survival demanded cooperation. Fire, food, and shelter were shared. No one could endure the cold alone. Yet the burials at Sungir, and others like them, tell us another story. One of difference, of inequality, even in a time when life itself was precarious. Some individuals were laid to rest with thousands of beads, ivory spears, fox teeth, and ornaments. Others were buried with little more than their bones. The contrast is striking. This suggests that even in the Ice Age, certain people carried status. Perhaps it was tied to family, children born into lineages of prominence. Perhaps it was tied to knowledge, shamans who guided rituals, healers who held secrets of plants and spirits. Perhaps it was tied to leadership, hunters who led the chase, elders whose words carried weight. The richness of some burials shows that resources were not always divided equally. In a world of scarcity, to dedicate thousands of hours to beads for a single grave meant that person mattered more than others. Their memory was preserved in a way most could never hope for. But wealth in the Ice Age was not like wealth today. There was no gold, no coin, no permanent monument. Wealth was measured in labor, in time, in objects made by hand. A bead was not currency, but a fragment of life, a piece of someone's work, given to someone else's memory. The more beads, the more hours, the more hands involved. This makes the rich burials even more extraordinary. They represent not only status, but the collective sacrifice of a community. Time spent on beads was time not spent hunting, gathering, or repairing tools. To give so much labor to the dead meant that the living placed immense value on a few. Still, inequality in the Ice Age did not erase cooperation. Even those of high status depended on their bands. No bead could protect against hunger, no ivory spear against the cold. Status gave recognition, perhaps reverence, but not independence. The rhythm of life remained shared. Fires tended, food divided, shelters built together. What these burials reveal is that humanity has always lived in a tension between equality and difference, between the need to share and the desire to honor a few above the rest. The Ice Age was no exception. And so, even in a world of unrelenting cold, where survival was fragile, people carried more than spears and hides. They carried symbols of status, of meaning, of hierarchy that reached beyond the grave. The graves at Sungir are not the only signs of inequality in the Ice Age. Across Europe, archaeologists have uncovered burials that speak of difference. Some adorned with ornaments, others plain, some placed with care, others left with little. The contrast suggests that even in small bands of hunters and gatherers, there were layers of status. One striking example comes from Dolní Věstonice in the Czech Republic. another site of Ice Age life. There, 3 young people were buried together beneath the earth. Their bodies were arranged carefully, covered with ochre, their graves rich with ornaments. The effort taken in their burial stood out sharply from others found nearby. They were remembered differently, honored more deeply. Such burials suggest that power was not measured only by strength. Knowledge may have mattered just as much. Those who understood rituals, who carried stories, who knew how to heal or how to predict the movement of herds, these people may have held influence beyond what hunting alone could give. Spiritual authority, even in the Ice Age, could elevate someone above their peers. At Sungir, the children's burials add weight to this idea. The disabled boy, who could not have been a hunter, was nevertheless given one of the richest burials of all. His status may have been symbolic, tied to belief rather than labor. He may have been seen as touched by forces beyond the ordinary, a figure between worlds. Another sign of inequality lies in the very objects used. Fox teeth, mammoth ivory, and shells carried from distant places were not easy to obtain. To place them in a grave was to signal access to resources, to trade, to effort beyond the ordinary. Those with such items were marked as special, their lives tied to networks and meanings that others did not share. Yet status in the Ice Age was fragile. A leader could not hoard food, for hunger would tear a band apart. A shaman could not ignore the needs of the group, for survival required unity. Unlike the kings and nobles of later ages, Ice Age elites held influence, but not dominance. Their status was expressed in symbols, not in lasting power. This makes their burials all the more meaningful. In life, they may not have stood apart in every way. In death, however, their memory was raised above others. The beads, the ivory, the ornaments, they were the Ice Age version of monuments, silent declarations of significance in a world where most were forgotten. And so we see a pattern emerge. Even in the most fragile societies, humans sought difference. They created status, they marked hierarchy, they chose to honor some more than others. The frozen plains carried hunger and hardship, but also prestige, meaning, and belief. If we step back and imagine daily life in an Ice Age camp, the traces of inequality become easier to sense. Most people rose to the same cold mornings, wore the same fur clothing, ate the same thin broth. But within the sameness, small differences would have spoken volumes. A necklace of beads worn around the neck, a spear carved not only for function, but for beauty, a headpiece adorned with animal teeth or ivory pins. These objects were not simply useful. They were symbols, marks of belonging, identity, and prestige. They told others who was important, who carried knowledge, who was remembered differently. And because such objects took time and effort to make, they also showed the labor of the group. A person wearing hundreds of beads did not make them all themselves. Others gave their time, their hands, their patience. Prestige was not only personal, it was collective recognition. The sharing of resources and labor created a paradox. On one hand, Ice Age bands were cooperative, bound together by necessity. On the other, they allowed, even encouraged, the elevation of certain individuals. Perhaps it strengthened the group's identity, giving them symbols of unity through difference. In many hunter-gatherer societies studied in recent times, those who act as shamans or ritual leaders do not hold power in the way chiefs or kings do. They cannot command others, but they are treated with respect. They carry knowledge of healing, of rituals, of stories that gives them influence. The Ice Age may have been similar. The richly buried children at Sungir, the disabled boy, the elder with thousands of beads. These were not rulers in the modern sense, but they were marked as special, as bridges between the ordinary and the extraordinary. It is also possible that death itself heightened difference. In life, the Sunghe girl may not have stood apart in every moment, but in death, she became a focus of memory. The beads, the ivory spear, the ornaments, these were acts of mourning, of elevation. Her burial turned her into a figure greater than her short years. What we see then is not inequality as domination, but inequality as remembrance. The Ice Age elite did not live with palaces or armies. Their distinction came after death, in the way they were buried, in the hours of labor invested in their memory. Still, the effect is unmistakable. In the soil of Sunghe, in the caves of Dolny Vestonit, in sites scattered across Europe, we find the same story. Not all were remembered equally. Some graves shine with beads and ornaments, while others fade into silence. The frozen ground preserved these differences, and they whisper still. Even in the earliest chapters of humanity, we carried status with us. The Ice Age was a world of extremes. Cold winds swept the plains, hunger pressed on every camp, predators circled in the night. Yet within that world, people created not only tools and fires, but symbols, objects and rituals that mark difference, status and memory. The burials at Sunghe show us this clearly. Some lives were clothed in beads, their bodies laid carefully with ivory spears and ornaments. Others were given little more than the earth. In this contrast, we see the beginnings of hierarchy, the roots of inequality. But it was not the inequality of kings and peasants, of walls and crowns. It was quieter, woven into memory rather than domination. A child honored with thousands of beads did not rule in life, yet in death, she carried prestige beyond measure. An elder buried with ornaments was not a king, but his endurance was marked as worthy of reverence. These differences remind us that even in the earliest times, humans were more than creatures of necessity. They sought meaning in distinction. They created signs of value that outlasted the body, and in doing so, they planted the seeds of social structure that would grow in later ages into chiefdoms, kingdoms, and empires. Yet the Ice Age elite were still bound by the same fragility as all others. No bead could shield them from hunger. No ivory spear could stop the cold. Their status was symbolic, their memory elevated, but their lives were as vulnerable as any. The wolves howled for all. The snow fell on every shelter. The fire was shared by everyone. In this balance between equality and difference, between the shared struggle and the honored few, we see something deeply human. The need to belong and the need to remember. The need to endure and the need to leave behind more than survival. The Sunghe girl, the boys, the elder, they stand for all of this. Their beads whisper of care. Their ornaments speak of status. Their graves remind us that humanity has always been more than hunger. We have always carried memory into the earth. And so the story closes where it began. In the frozen silence of the Ice Age, life was not about comfort. It was about enduring one more day. But in that endurance, people found space for beauty, for ritual, for hierarchy, for belief. They left behind whispers in pigment and beads, in ivory and ochre. The wind still moves across the Russian plains. The caves still hold their silence. And beneath it all, the names of those who once lived are waiting still, carved not in stone, but in memory, in the fragile symbols that have outlasted time.